Good afternoon or evening. This is Curry County Voices. We are at the Gold Beach City Hall in the council chambers. And today we are pleased to have a conversation with the Gold Beach Chief of Police, Jordan White.
Carl, thank you for this opportunity.
This is a wonderful opportunity for us and something that we like to do at Curry County Voices is create transparency and public awareness of who their government is. Now, sitting here in the chambers, I think we have to start, Chief, with the question that those of us who came to Curry County and Gold Beach as an adult get asked all the time. Why did you choose to come to Gold Beach? What brought you here?
I am in Gold Beach because it's a good fit for me and my family, and we're a good fit for the town. When you look at the reel of life as to why we did anything, I think it's natural to choose the highlights that we like to focus on as those good things in our life that we want to celebrate and talk about. And I have a lot of them, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those today. But for me getting here, it was really a matter of the heart, and I'd gone through a time in my life after probably one of the most rewarding careers that anyone with an addiction to adrenaline and a hero complex could imagine, and was at a place where I didn't know what to do next. And largely that was because of losing my mom. In March of 2018, she went through a really tough battle that she lost, and she passed away unexpectedly. And it was a very pivotal time in my life. I'd actually, between the time of her having a stroke and ending up in the hospital, had filed to run in politics for sheriff in Flathead County, where I'd had my first career up in Montana, and gave my campaign launch while she was in the hospital. And she was probably one of the most influential people in my entire life. And that sickness that we went through was devastating to me. When she passed away and I had been pulled in a million different directions, it really cost me a lot. I wasn't able to focus on the campaign, and it really took a lot of the things that I thought were important and put those back in perspective. So after that, my wife Natalie and I went on an unplanned 4,000-mile road trip across 9 states just to see what the world had for us, like what we were going to do in the next chapter of our lives. And that brought us to Gold Beach. While we were here, I had a chance to meet with Sheriff Ward, and from meeting him in the morning and followed up with a formal interview by the middle of the day, it launched us into a selection process. They had 4 positions open, and we left the following Tuesday. We got in on a Friday and left the following Tuesday with a conditional offer of employment. And it was with a warm welcome and a full heart that we knew we were coming back to Gold Beach. We were able to enjoy the rest of our vacation knowing that we were coming to a new home. And that was just the place, the people, the coast. I'd grown up listening to stories my mom told. Both my parents were from Carmel, California, and I would say they had salt water in their veins, even though they moved to Montana when I was only 3 years old. But I always had a dream of being close to the ocean, kept going back to the ocean, and when I got here and considered living here, it was like it finally belonged.
That's great to hear. Could you talk about your extensive background in law enforcement?
I had an amazing childhood. I was homeschooled from the 4th grade through high school, lived up in the mountains, was off-grid, worked for the Amish when I was 14, building log houses. I really did have a chance to try a ton of things, but ultimately at 18, I joined the local ambulance in the town of Big Fork, Montana. And I had been transported by air ambulance when I was 7 years old after being hit by a car. And I felt there was a duty and a price to be repaid. My volunteer 2nd grade substitute teacher was a paramedic on the ambulance, and she had taken care of me. And when I became an EMT, she was my mentor, and we worked together for 8 years on the ambulance as volunteers. And I also joined the fire department at 18 and met a lot of the folks that worked in public safety, a lot of overlap in that field. And the undersheriff at the time for the sheriff's office was also a flight paramedic on the same helicopter that had flown me when I was a young boy. We became friends. We were both scuba divers, and that really opened my eyes to law enforcement. And I loved the fact that they were always busy. They got to generate their own activity. In the ambulance and fire department, we mostly waited for something to happen. We'd drive around a little bit. We called it trolling for trauma. But for the most part, it was law enforcement that always got to go out and make a difference and interact with the community really on a daily basis in a real open and meaningful way that we didn't have a chance to when we were waiting for something to happen. So I joined the sheriff's office as a reserve deputy on my 21st birthday, and then from there I had a chance to work patrol. I filled in some different roles. It was a really interesting time in law enforcement back then because it was a highly sought after career and it was very competitive. And I moved around a lot and helped out a small agency down in West Yellowstone, Montana. I lived there for a couple years waiting for the full-time slot. Had joined as a part-time reserve deputy at the beginning, waiting for my full-time shot at a career position to open up. And that did. I moved back to the Flathead and began my career. And within a couple years, had become a field supervisor and joined the SWAT team. Started a dive rescue program for the sheriff's office that ended up serving all of pretty much western Montana. We went all over. I had a vision of bringing in volunteer professional divers into the sheriff's office because they were really good at diving, and deputies just were so busy they never could get the time to become great divers. And there's a lot of pressure that comes from that. And that team really introduced me to the next opportunity I had, which was to take over search and rescue. In Montana, it's the same as it is here in Oregon, where the sheriff's the one responsible for search and rescue. So I became a full-time coordinator and led several search and rescue teams and units in our county, about 150 volunteers. And we were busy. We bordered Glacier National Park in Canada with a lot of snow, and we also had about half of Flathead Lake, which was the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. So we had a lot of boating activity, and I got to sit on the board at the state level through that position, and it got me politically connected and got me really exposed to a lot of professional activities outside of Montana as well, and it became involved in numerous boards through that, and ultimately helped me get promoted to being the undersheriff when that same undersheriff that had hired me when I first started ended up running for sheriff, and he selected me as his undersheriff. So that's going back to 2010. I began my administrative career, and it was in that time that I took a combination of my search and rescue experience and my administrative experience and pursued something crazy at the time, which was to develop a public-private philanthropic helicopter rescue program that I had first envisioned serving the northwest corner of the state, and we ended up being bigger than I ever imagined. We took over the whole state of Montana doing hoist rescues and thermal searches, and also the state of Idaho. So it was a very busy program, and I was the director of that for the last 5 years that I was in Montana, and was a commercial helicopter pilot and rescue specialist and rescue swimmer on that program. So that's a lot. I mean, I just fast forwarded through an amazing, really 22 years of public safety, and a lot of it overlapped, a lot of it moved quickly. But I got to be a deputy coroner for like 9 years of that. I got to be on SWAT for 8 years. I got to do a lot in that small, we were a 54-person department in a community of about 100,000 in about a 5,400 square mile county.
Can you identify one or two experiences that more than others had a substantial influence on your life and what you're doing today?
You know, a couple things really were impactful for me, and I think, you know, when I think of the law enforcement specific things, they don't have as much impact as one moment that I realized was a choice I made that showed me the power of choice. And I remember it was around 2005, I had started the dive team in 2004. We'd been very successful on a number of different recoveries and search missions. And because I had that team, I'd come into work one day and there was a message in my mail slot. And I was on patrol, I was a supervisor on patrol at the time. And I returned the phone call, and I was just sitting in our squad room. It was still before cell phones. We had the cord that, you know, coily cord that went to the wall phone that still had. But I called this number back, and I talked to a guy, told him who I was, and I had a message to call. And he said, yeah, he said, I'm just calling because I saw in the newspaper there was a report that toe bones were found in Whitefish Lake. I didn't even know about it. And I said, okay. He said, that's my son. I said, well, how do you know? He said, my son disappeared in 1972 with his friend, and my son was never found. And he said, a fisherman was trolling and found a piece of sock with toe bones, and I read about it in the police blotter. He's like, I know that's my son. And in that moment, I just said, sir, if that's your son, I'm going to bring him home to you. And I had no idea what I just said. So I went after work, I got our boat, I got my dive gear, and I began taking 1 or 2 volunteer divers when they could join me. And I would go out and I checked in the lake, and it was about 80 feet deep. It was black, the visibility was horrible. And the guy that had found them was certain he could take me right back to exactly where he'd found them. Well, he showed me about 1.5 mile trolling line that he'd been on. And underwater, where I had about 3 feet of visibility, I realized I had just signed up for a real pickle. And I began going almost daily after my shift was over. I would go up and dive, one dive, on a tank of air in search. And I had a progressive pivoting search pattern that I would move up. And after several weeks, I indeed did find the full remains of this young man that had been missing for almost 34 years. And I planned a large-scale operation. We did a complete forensic recovery of the entire skeleton that had been entombed in a sludge of oil spill. Train had derailed in 1989 and had left an oil spill in the lake that had preserved the skeleton. But it was hugely gratifying to do that, but I remembered in that moment, and then the weeks of diving afterwards, I didn't want to give up, but I had told this guy I was going to do it. And I regretted it many, many days. I questioned whether I'd be successful. But when ultimately we were successful and we made that recovery, I realized that the power of what we commit to as people can change everything. And to see that family be able to get closure after that time and get to share that experience with them put public safety in a whole new perspective to me. And hearing their stories made me realize what an opportunity it is to be part of somebody's life at that level. And I'd say from that moment on, I did my job completely differently and at a level that far exceeded what was expected of me, because I had pretty much raised the expectations of myself to an almost unimaginable level, and most of the time it worked out for me.
Now, Chief, you mentioned that the telephone you used had a cord. And I know from my own experience that there are people here that don't understand that technology has changed and law enforcement has changed. I have memories of what law enforcement was when I was a kid, but I have more memories of what law enforcement was like in a suburban town in Massachusetts when my kids were kids. And the officers walked the beat. They knew everybody's name. My children came home complaining that Officer Young knew just not their name, but whose child they were, and would ask, "How's your dad doing?" by name. And now those memories predate your career in law enforcement, but you know, it has changed. I like to say back then we didn't see people looking like they were in combat, driving equipment that belonged on the battlefield. But I take it law enforcement has changed during your career as well. And could you tell us how it's changed?
I think that I made it in the tail end of one of the greatest eras in law enforcement. And I say that because the officers you just described were reaching retirement as I joined the force in the late 90s. They were driven out by a number of things, mostly technology, because as technology increased, it forced us behind a computer more than in front of the public. And they were really concerned about that. I was lucky that I had a lot of mentors and I had supervisors that I still celebrate today that are, you know, they're in their 70s now, but we still stay in contact. And they were my old sergeants. One of them lived next door to me when I got hit by that bicycle when I was 7, and he brought me to schools as a prop for bicycle safety. I mean, we couldn't even do that today. He used me as a scabbed up mess to show me why you should ride your bicycle safely. But he was, you know, he was a friend. And I was fortunate that those guys who welcomed me into this field impressed upon me the importance of that relationship with the public and the relationship with the schools. And I actually started a school resource officer program at the beginning of my career. I think I was 22 years old at the time, but I valued that, and I saw the benefits of being in relationship. And I bring that to Gold Beach. I love being able to talk to the kids in the schools because we're two human beings sharing the same space. And it's disconcerting to some people that police walk up to you and talk to you just because you're a human. But I believe in that. And I love being able to be involved in the community at that level, and I'm encouraging our officers to do that. But there has been a trend, especially in the last few years, where it's been more dangerous. That relationship has become fragmented. There's been a militarization of the police, and I saw that occur during my time on SWAT when we began to get more resources, and a lot of our our resources, because our budgets were so small, came from military surplus. So it wasn't an intent to turn law enforcement, small-town law enforcement into military units, but it happened by accident almost, because the equipment was there to help keep us safe and deal with the most extreme cases. And I still see value in that it's available to keep us safe, because some situations, not in Gold Beach or Curry County specifically, but in larger areas, have some pretty extreme resources that are almost military grade. So I can see it, but it's a dangerous balance in relationship to feel like the public feels safe and that law enforcement's approachable. So balancing that act requires a lot of communication and awareness on both sides, and a willingness to get uncomfortable for the police to be available to the public to talk about these issues, and for the public to have the confidence that they can share their concerns without retribution. I pity the day that we lose that connection between law enforcement and the community. And I hope it's never in my lifetime that we would lose that in Gold Beach. And that's part of what I said brought me here is, I know I'm a good fit for here, and it's a good fit for me because that relationship's still valued here. I mean, look at us.
Yes.
It's important for us to be able to share our perspectives with people. And you see in big places, that's just not the same. And where I came from, it wasn't the same. And I even campaigned on a platform of openness and connectedness in our community. And it wasn't as appreciated as it once was, because other people had other concerns. They just hoped that the law enforcement stuff got taken care of by the cops and they didn't have to be involved. But you can appreciate the way for us to be in it together is for the community to be involved, and that's what I find here at Gold Beach especially.
What is your expectation of how things may change in the future? What are your hopes as to how it may change in the future?
I have conversations with other administrators weekly and monthly, and officers almost daily, as more agencies have more difficult times staffing their departments. We can expect more technology to come in. More artificial intelligence is proposed in almost every realm, and law enforcement isn't exempt from that. But what we see is communities essentially offering ridiculous incentives. The most recent one I heard of today is one of a small police department in Oregon offering a $25,000 signing bonus for an officer that'll sign on for a 5-year contract.
Wow.
And that was 1 year ago. It was a $10,000 sign-on bonus for most of the agencies in the state. And that was the larger agencies. So along the I-5 corridor, they were signing bonuses for $10,000. And to imagine communities doing that is concerning to me, because we still may get officers joining the force for the right reasons, and maybe that money will help them with a down payment on their house. But it also, it may attract somebody to switch agencies for the wrong reason, because they are trying to make ends meet and that money is appealing. But the reality is that money isn't that much in the grand scheme of things. One of the challenges we have here at Gold Beach has been the rising cost of homes and the limited number of rentals. We can't get officers to even buy a home in Gold Beach. And that's my goal, is for officers to be invested in the community and for them to shop at the same grocery stores, get their gas at the same gas stations as the community they serve. Brings a different level of service and relationship than an officer who may have to commute from Brookings or Port Orford because they just can't find housing in Gold Beach. You know, I want our kids in our schools. I want our families eating at our local restaurants, because that's where relationships build, and that's where the accountability for how we do our job gets measured. So those changes that we can expect are going to be significant, and the influx of people into Gold Beach is going to be something we have to manage and temper to make sure that we don't outgrow our servants in public works, in the fire department, in the police force, in our kitchens, in our schools, in the hospital. And we have to manage that, but I see law enforcement is going to be a careful balance between meeting the regulations and the stipulations for more training and more accountability at the state level. We could spend a lot of time in school maintaining our credentials. Right now we have some pretty extensive training requirements that never existed before. Essentially before, if an officer didn't do a good job, he got remedial training, and if he didn't get it, they were fired. But with the climate now, the training requirements are pretty extreme. So if we're not writing reports, we're doing online training or doing something. So we're not out on the streets as much as we used to be. But I see value in the community understanding that, and that we don't on patrol as much as we used to be, but we also need those phone calls from the public to tell us they see something or there's a problem, because we also are restricted on what we can do. When an officer used to be able to just walk up to somebody on the street and have a casual contact, we aren't as freely able to do that today because people might feel intimidated by those contacts. So we need other justification sometime to do our job, and that's where partnership with the community is critical. And I encourage our folks to say, call us, call 911, let us know that you see a problem, because we may have been suspicious, but we didn't have enough to be able to act. We have to report, we actually have to file a report. If we take self-initiated activity, we have to file the reason that we did it, whether we had prejudice when we did it, what our, the race demographics and all these things are required if we initiate contact. And a lot of times, it can even be, harassment complaints can be filed against us because we went and talked to somebody about a contentious issue. But
You mentioned reports on cameras. I mentioned to you earlier, back in the 60s in law school, I actually did a study of decisions made by the police department in Philadelphia, and their actual numbered reports that are prepared by an officer when he has contact, he or she has contact with
Yes.
someone. I believe they're called 48s. Are they still around?
Well, they've gotten far more extensive than they ever used to. We've been collecting crime stats since the beginning of my career, when things were still almost kept track of manually as checks, for the month. And now it's all computerized. But yes, there's a lot of concern about how we make our decisions, and if there is prejudice. What I do love about Oregon, there's a lot of things that are different than my training in Montana. But what is unique here is there's more liberty and more protection here in what an officer can ask you about. And I appreciate that. I think it's tremendous that officers can't just go on fishing expeditions in Oregon. We actually have to have reasonable suspicion to be able to pursue things. And it's a balance of our integrity to ensure that we aren't jamming people up, so to speak, that might occur in other places. But in Oregon, our rights and our liberties are highly protected, and if we don't see something, we can't just randomly accuse people of things. And not that I ever did. I was always a proponent of transparency and accountability, and the quickest way to shatter that is start to make things up and break that relationship of trust with the public. But in some states, you can actually lie within reason to the public just to see how they react.
You bring back a memory of when I did my document review in Philadelphia. They were paper documents in a folder. But I also spent time interviewing officers in the detective bureau and there was a phrase for it. It was called testifying. And, that's one phrase that's stayed with me for many, many years, obviously. And it's something that we really deal with in the bigger cities, I think, more so than we have here. Now, you've been here for long enough to have a sense for just how is the Gold Beach Police Department doing, in your view?
It's good. We have a small agency, which means that it can be almost like a family. It's exciting to come into it from outside, to have had the experience. I'm so grateful for the experience of a larger area and of a bigger agency that had bigger problems, because it helps put things in perspective. We certainly have issues, especially when it comes to accountability and personal responsibility. My priority in how I lead the police department is focused on legitimacy. And legitimacy is the perception of the public into the trustworthiness and the ability of the police to do their job and to do it right for the right reasons. And by maintaining a level of personal responsibility and accountability with the officers, then it allows us to do our job through cooperation rather than compliance. So I know there's been some challenges as far as people when I came in not knowing what to expect, and that's good. I think we should all be a little surprised and a little uncertain about what's going to happen next, because that puts us on our toes and it makes us open to change. Small agencies like to protect themselves from change and from outside change, because you never know what it's going to bring, and any outside force could shift that family dynamic that they really, really hold dear to. And instead of coming up in the ranks where I have concerns about the protecting that relationship, so to speak, for me, I get to value that perspective that the Gold Beach Police Department has amongst themselves that preceded me. I get to be part of it by sheer attrition. I just got to be welcomed into that. I can ruin it if I want to. My goal is to continue to build that relationship of trust and family and communication. I love the openness of the officers to work with one another and support one another, to be fluid with changing shifts. We have a contract that says they get certain things, like 2 weeks notice before their shift gets changed, and if we don't do that, then they're subject to overtime and all those things that generally occur in a larger city's contract. But the caveat in the contract is that they can agree to waive that. And by maintaining a relationship of cooperation between the administrative ranks and the staff, we're able to just get the job done. And the police department shares that vision very, very well in being flexible. We don't have an endless amount of resources for people. We've been through COVID. We've had people get sick, and we still staff the police department because the public safety is number one, and we'll figure out how to take care of ourselves after that. In other areas of public safety, namely fire and EMS, there's a perspective that you have to take care of yourself first to be able to take care of everyone else second. The analogy of putting your oxygen mask on yourself and then helping the passenger in the airplane next to you get theirs on. But in law enforcement, it's different. We have to put the lives of the innocent ahead of our own, and then we get to take care of ourselves. And I'm so proud of the police department that they get that they're not so concerned about their own safety and their own needs and their own priorities that they would put any of those first. So I'm pleased and I'm excited to work with them and to see them interact. That being said, I also give them latitude for being humans. I'm human. all of our officers are human, and we do things every once in a while that we need to be checked on. And a lot of those things can be corrected if we take responsibility for it. We say we're sorry when we've made a mistake, and we take corrective action to make sure it doesn't happen again, and the community meets us there. And that's why I'm excited to be here, to be part of this team. And I challenge the community, if you have any questions and concerns about that, come see me, we'll talk about it. And they have. I love that people will come in and share concerns, whether they had anything to do with me or not, and look for answers and information so they don't have something hanging over them that's caused them concern in the past. So we clear the air and we move forward.
What's unique about Gold Beach in your mind as a community?
I feel a little bit like I stepped back in time when I came here. We have old stuff. And when I say old stuff, it's not necessarily the tangible things. It's not that our jail is old or our buildings are old. I like to think that it's our values that are old. We're old-fashioned in the fact that people come by and bring cookies. I love that I'm building new houses that are important to the community. People see them as important. But in the middle of a concrete pour, somebody will stop by that I've never met, and they'll bring their work gloves and a shovel, and they'll come and help pour concrete, and we'll get to know each other in the process. And when it's over, they pack up their tools and they go on to whatever they had next in their agenda. I love meeting people that way, and that's the bread and butter of what makes Gold Beach great. I expect we'll probably grow up from that and we'll change, but people still trust each other here. I tell my old colleagues in Montana, they want to know what it's like, and I say we still have some people that do some crazy stuff, but they don't shoot at each other, generally. They do sometimes, but in Montana, that was pretty common. We could expect it. I remember negotiating neighborhood feuds while people were literally exchanging bullets with one another. And we'd work through it, but that's not where we're at here. People may have their feelings hurt, but they're willing to talk about it. And if they agree to disagree, then that's it, and it's over at that. So I love that we can be open to other people's beliefs, other people's emotions. We're receptive. We don't have to agree with me or you to sit in the same room. And we can move on. We can find common ground, and that's important.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to say before we end this conversation? You're on the hot seat.
Oh,
It's not a hot seat. I really have enjoyed this conversation, and some people may know Jordan and I have known each other. We're both members of the Rotary Club. We've had picnics in the park together.
Yep.
And
You've helped educate me on a lot of those values that I hold dear in Gold Beach, and I'll say it was while we were here on our first visit that my wife Natalie and I were sitting in our hotel room channel surfing, and we came across a local channel at the time that was playing the county commissioners meeting. And I thought, what era did we just step into? And understanding that was normal, that your voice is being broadcast, it's important for the community to know. And that was one of the first things. So I think this is a great program, and it's going to be really essential moving forward. I think we've come out of a wave of COVID. It has tempered people. Every challenge we face has tempered them more. And the more that people get frustrated, and the more that we suffer with inflation and uncertainty in the world, the more opportunities we have to close ourselves off. And I think that's going to be the challenge that Gold Beach faces. And we get to choose whether we're a community that values holiday meals at the fairgrounds together, and we bring 500 people under one roof and we share a meal together, or we hide in our homes. And I know that there's a time that's responsible that we need to stay away from each other, keep distance. But I hope we never forget the value of connection, and that when it's safe to do so, that we bring those values back that make Gold Beach special, and that we get our meals again, and we can sit together with strangers as friends at the fairgrounds and share Thanksgiving or Christmas meals. The more challenges that the world faces, the more opportunities we have to take a risk and to be a friend or to be a neighbor. I believe Gold Beach will always make the right choice, and it may be a challenge at times, but in the end, I know we'll come together and we'll support each other. And that's what makes Gold Beach special, and that's why I'm here.
Great. We're glad you're here. And for those who are watching this on CurryCountyVoices.com, if you would like to sit in the seat where the chief is, or a similar seat in another location, and talk about why you're here in Gold Beach and what role you play in the community, we would look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah.
We're currently, with COVID, we are restricted in what we're able to do. Right now, frankly, we're here the first Monday of every month doing the Gold Beach City Council meetings because those meetings are held in full compliance with the existing COVID restrictions. There are other meetings that we used to film that we no longer film because they're not. But we do look forward to putting programs on. Curry County Voices was founded to be part of that channel that the chief mentioned when he was here before, channel 182 on Spectrum. Unfortunately, that channel is now totally dark. The commissioners no longer use it. You need to go to their website if you wish to watch their meetings. But you can go to our website and see some very exciting other programs. So thank you for watching. And Chief, it's good to see you, and we'll see you again on the first Monday of March.
Thank you, Carl, for this opportunity.
Well, thank you. Okay, that was fine.
That was good stuff.